Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another Gemstone Legends video. And in this video, we've got part 3 of the War Strategy series that we've been doing. Guild Wars is definitely one of the um, biggest features to come to Gemstone Legends. I think it's a huge undertaking what they've tried to accomplish, and therefore it can be complex. So the goal of this series, with the help of our very special guest, Mr. Cousin Eddie, is to break that stuff down for you. So this is part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 or 2, we kind of go from beginner to intermediate to advanced. This being the advanced video where we're going to try to give you guys a leg up on how to compete against the teams that really have some sophisticated ideas on how best to move across the battlefield and secure that treasury and secure the win. So very happy to be finishing up this series with this video. We'll keep other possibilities in mind as things come up, and I'll give it to Cousin Eddie here to take us away.
Hey, how's it going, guys? First off, just want to thank you again, Mr. Spock, for having me on. I'm really excited about talking about advanced strategy today. So like Mr. Spock alluded to earlier, we last left off talking about specific heroes, specific teams. We talked a little bit about how not just about the rules, but necessarily, but also just about point values and different positions on the board. We've talked about a lot of different stuff, but today we're going to talk about what Mr. Spock told me earlier is the juiciest part, right? We're going to talk about the advanced tactics. We're going to talk about the lessons that I can give you that we can translate hopefully into some big wins for you guys. And so we're going to give you a little bit of what I'd consider the secret sauce from our guild on what we do for wars. And we're also going to talk about some of the major updates to Guild Wars because it has vastly changed the war strategy. So first thing I want to do is I want to get started talking a little bit about positioning on the opponent side of the board. So the first thing that I think is incredibly important for people to realize as far as changes go between what war looked like for the first, I don't know, several months and what it's looked like as it's changed over just the last couple of weeks is that now, instead of having to retain, not just take, but retain the treasury from your opponent, you now just have to take it once in order to get their treasure. Now, I do want to talk a little bit first about how divisions in Guild Wars and how treasury works and how those red treasure chests work, because I think that there's an important aspect to that hasn't really been spoken to yet. So you'll notice that every time you win with your guild, that you are going to move up several points in the entire league. And so that, of course, is going to change. The different leagues are going to change what kind of compensation you get in all of your chests. So if you are in the beginner league or like the wooden league, you're going to get some stuff no matter what, win or lose, but it is going to be far less than you would get if you were in the challenger league, right? The top league for the guilds for the entire game. Mm-hmm. And that's to the tune to, you might get some bronze scrolls at the bottom, and you might even get a legit full platinum scroll if you end up getting one of those red chests at the top of the league. So
when it happened to you before?
It's happened to me 3 times, which is unfair. I'll say it. We have 30 people in our guild. That's 90 opportunities. They don't come up every round. Yeah. And I somehow have gotten 3. So you're right. It has happened to me. It's great. I've gotten 2 legendaries from those 3 scrolls. And and don't get me wrong, it does feel kind of like a rich getting richer sort of scheme. But the thing is that, you know, this is a competitive game, and it is important, I think, for those kind of things to scale, to give people a reason to go up to the leagues, right? There's no point in winning if you're going to get chests no matter what, if there isn't a scaling of compensation. And so I think that Strybot Games does a really, really good job of scaling their prizes. And so So that's real, but then you also have the differentiation between red chests and regular just wooden chests.
Mm-hmm.
So regular wooden chests are going to have a specific set of prizes for you whenever you win the game. But the red chests are always just a step above. I think of it as, if I got a grade when I was a kid, yeah, I liked having an A, but I would prefer to see an A plus, right? And so I think of it as the leagues are kind of like the letters of grades that you'd get, right? And then you get a little plus with those red chests. And so you want to be in the highest league possible, which means you want to win.
Yeah.
Guild Wars is not just about taking the treasury, it's about winning the war.
Yeah.
However, it's also nice when you can not only win the war and be in a good league, but also get some red chests for your team. And so that's ultimately the goal. And I think that differentiation is important, because a red chest doesn't just mean you're going to get crazy good stuff. If you're in a lower league, it's going to be better than the rest of the chests, but there's so much more out there in this game.
And hopefully these tips today can help elevate the league that you're in, because there, as I've mentioned with this kind of war versus empires and puzzles from the start, it's much more sophisticated. There's a lot more opportunity because it's more sophisticated. There's more opportunities to have more of an impact. And so this is kind of some of the stuff we're going to talk about, is like, how can you be clever? How can you take what's there and find these interesting things that can be done? And this is what a lot of the top guilds are doing. And that's one thing that differentiates. So for a lot of people, you wouldn't be able to get this information unless you're in those top guilds and studying your opponent. Fortunately, that is the case here. So we're here to share that with you. And hopefully that can, if you put these things into practice, can help boost you up. Quick thought, anyone who's watching that isn't currently playing, download links in the description. If you use those versus downloading the App Store, you will get a free $50 starter bonus, which is just going to make it easier to start the game. I've got a huge playlist of videos with pretty much answering every question you could think of when starting out. So easy to get going. It's a fun game. Eddie here started from my ad, if you want to call it, as well. So it's a fun game. We were just talking before this, hasn't played empires and puzzles in 2 years or so. So anyways, good game. Come check it out if you're not already. And for everyone who is playing, we'll get into some more of that strategy now for you.
For sure. Yeah, no, for those of you who haven't seen the other videos or might not remember, I cannot thank Mr. Spock enough for that 50. It's night and day, it's kind of insane how it ramps the I guess the opportunity for things to get better and better and better when you get these. I mean, the games draw to me, one of the games, not just the complexity, not just things, the intangibles that we talk about that separates it from another Match 3 game that we always talk about. It's also the company's willingness to try and bring people in by compensating them for doing things in game. I don't think there's another company that has made a game like this that compensates their players for playing the game at a high level like this, like Strybog Games does.
Yeah.
And so, and they make it so much easier with content creators like Mr. Spock, and you should definitely follow, like and subscribe, all of those things that we talk about in every single YouTube video, but actually follow the videos, right? There's a mix. You can just go in sequential order and you're going to learn everything. And that's how and I've watched his videos, and it's the reason why I started playing the game. So definitely into it. Yeah, 100%. So once you get to once you get to a level where you've kind of plateaued, right? And this happens in almost every one of these games. Their algorithms match you up with somebody who is around the same strength, and after a few weeks, you're going to see if you're not changing the way that you play, or if you're not progressing as individuals and as a guild, you're going to become stagnant, right? You're going to see the same names every once in a while. And so what we're here to do is we're here to try and kind of give you some ideas to try and tweak thought processes on how war works so that you can try and bust through and not just see new players and not just see more challenging opponents, but also see different leagues. And so we're going to start here with the main difference, like I alluded to earlier, which is now all of a sudden you don't have to hold treasury anymore.
That's crazy. That was such a big.
This is huge.
Yeah.
It changes everything, right? Yeah. So we used to backwards map how long it would take for us to get from one position to the treasury. And then we would make sure that we hit the treasury of the opponents with under 30 minutes left so that they couldn't retake, because as we know, and if you haven't seen the first two videos, just a reminder, there's a 30-minute cooldown whenever you take a position. So you want to take the treasury with 30 minutes or less remaining in an effort to make sure that they can't retake the treasury, right? And you'll notice that depending on your enemy, you may, and how well coordinated they are, and whether or not they still have hits left, you might be able to take it a little bit earlier than that. But every second that you take earlier than 30 minutes meant that that's another second they had to try and retake that treasury. And so we had to backwards map everything.
I feel like in the early days, I saw it get taken back from us, where we got it a little bit too early, maybe with an hour left or 45 minutes left. They take it back, and all those extra chests that you would have had, you lose again, they take them back. So yeah, big change.
And not only do you lose those chests back, but you also lost like 2,000 points because the positions scale. Once you hit those back towers and into the gate's worth far more points, and the treasury is worth way more points than any other position on the board. And so not only have you risked your chests, you've also risked your huge point advantage going into the last hour of the game. And so what looked like, and you'll notice when you see the scores at the end of a war, especially in the days before this, you would see one team up by like 2,200 points, and you'd think, oh, well, they just got wrecked. No, there was a 200-point game until somebody went in and took the treasury, which means that it was super tight, and then one team just blew a hole through the entire war. And so that's no longer the case. Now you can take the treasury whenever you want, so long as you as an offense are coordinated and you are capable of busting through the defenses of the opponent. And so what we saw week 0, which is, I mean, I guess technically week 1, but I like to call it like week 0, just the fallout of the rules changes, is that we saw a whole lot of time zone checking. I don't know if any of you guys that play Gemstone Legends currently and are watching this video remember, but it was, oh, okay, well, it's 4 o'clock in this particular country where we know this guild is from. Cool, let's hit them because there's no way, because they're defenseless, right? And so we would hit, I think we hit Wilkie or Furia. I can't remember. We hit Furia. That's right. Week 1, we hit Furia, arguably the best team in the game.
Yeah.
At like 2 or 3 in the morning at their time, and we just walked right in and took the treasury. And it hasn't happened since, because everybody learned week 1, you have to pay attention to your defenses 24 hours straight now. That's the case. So now that it's kind of evened out a bit, now that we understand that, at any time someone can take your treasury, strategies are developing. And that's what we're going to talk about today, so that you guys can, strategize.
Yeah, you mentioned before there were, I think, 2 or 3 things in particular, ways of moving across the board that you would want to talk about for this. Yeah. Are all of those still relevant with this new change, or has it really been a big shakeup that has totally upset the best practices, so to speak, for strategically occupying the board?
Well, yeah, that's a really great question. The funny thing is that you would think that with a new strategy and a completely new way that that the game is played, that strategies would become obsolete. But the funny thing is that when it comes to getting red chests or occupying your opponent's treasury, it's actually become easier. So all of the strategies that guilds were already employing, they were employing them with a challenger, with somebody playing defense and paying attention, because everybody knows with 2 or 3 hours left in the game, you have to be on.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, a lot of these strategies just got better, because now you can do them at any time during the 24 hours. And there may not be 30 people on the opposing team that are paying attention and playing defense.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, not only have strategies not changed as much as you think they would, they've actually just gotten better.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you think of one that would be good to dive into?
Yes. Oh, 100%. If you don't mind, I'm gonna give you 2 or 3 that I think are going to elevate the game of anybody who's not employing them currently.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Cool. So the first one is what I call the Furia Diagonal. This started happening about 3 months into us at Guild Wars. We were in the Challenger League, which is the highest league, and we face Wilkie, Furia, and a smattering of about 4 or 5 other teams. And there's just kind of a rotation where we see either Furia or Wilkie, another one of those 5, and then the other between Fury, Wilkie, and another one of those 5. And it just kind of cycled. So Furia started doing what I would consider to be a really strong tactic, where they would occupy a tower either at the top or the bottom of the map, for starters, right? Then they would go all the way diagonally across our board. So
both ways or one or the other?
One or the other usually. If we were holding up defenses, then they would start doing it the other way. But they would usually wait until they had exhausted our attacks, and then they would go in and they would do this. So this is intelligent for 2 reasons. One, it is still the fastest way to the treasury. If you notice, no matter what, you're going to have to go through each layer or each column of positions in order to get to the treasury.
Mm-hmm.
So it does it in the same amount of time and the same amount of attacks.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is that once that diagonal is created, you have cut off your opponents from being able to progress on the other side of the board, because there is no linking position.
Mm-hmm.
It's been cut all the way through. They've taken your map, they've cut it in half in a way that you have to take one of their positions in order to even be able to play. It immobilizes you. And that's not great when they've taken all of their best teams that you would think would be on their side for defense, and they've stacked them in that diagonal.
So they make it really hard to take back that diagonal line. So they progress offensively, but make a defensive play at the same time, and they stack that diagonal with their best teams in hopes it will hold as long as possible or eat up a bunch of attacks. Interesting.
Right. And we didn't see it until it was too late the first time, obviously. But the warning signs were there. Once I started thinking about the war afterwards, just kind of analyzing the board, when we came into that first hour of attacking, we started to rush. And I noticed the same teams that we usually see that had pretty strong records were replaced by teams that were still pretty strong, but didn't have the same records. They didn't have the same total power, the TP that you can see at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't even have the same amount of awakening stars.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting to realize after this has happened to us, oh, so they have teams that look pretty identical. The heroes are mostly the same, but they aren't as awoken. They aren't tomed, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was their second string. We just didn't see it. We attacked through. We thought, oh, okay, Fury is a little weaker this week than they have been. And then we just were completely blinded to the idea that maybe they're just holding their teams in their castle. And that's exactly what they did. They had teams on the deploy, and then they would attack through, they would replace with 5, then they would attack through, replace with 5. So really all they needed were 5 rare teams, 5 epic teams, and 10 legendary teams to hold that line. And so
And
they
they
took their
would save their best versions of those teams for later on in the war.
Correct. They would save all of those in the castle because the castle holds all of your teams deployed or not, right? And
Mhm.
so we just didn't see them and we thought, okay, maybe they're just, making a play at the defense in the back. Maybe they've guarded their towers, or their treasury or their gate. And all of those were super squishy teams. We almost got there, but they played defense and they continued to, repel us because we were doing our same old tactics, and then they cut us off, and all of a sudden it's like we're immobilized. We have to take teams that are going to take 1 or 2 attacks to finally take down. I say 1 or 2, more like 2 or 3.
Mhm.
And we just didn't have the attacks. They did it at the end because they wanted the treasury. So they took all of, we had used our best teams, and some of our best players even were out of attacks. We were just completely depleted. We didn't have the attacks to break through their line, and so that's how they got us.
That does make sense to wait because, like, I was thinking about why would they wait? If you put out weaker teams first, something people need to keep in mind from a leadership perspective is like you have to wonder, are they doing something different this time? Are they trying a new strategy on us? You don't really know what's happening. And so the longer you wait to use your good teams, defensively or whatever, the higher the chance of people who are attacking have already used their best teams or their best players have already attacked because you're like, oh, maybe we just need to progress farther, then we'll find those teams or something. So that seems like a good way to potentially bait your opponents into making some bigger moves and then catching them off guard, being like, nope, here's the real challenge. And now you're not that prepared for it.
Right. And yeah, and that's exactly what we did. So they did. So what do we do the next week? We try it, of course.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, so like, that was cool. And
Yeah.
it stunk for us because we lost our treasury and the war.
Yeah.
So let's do that to somebody else. Oh, and it gangbusters. It was a game changer.
Hmm.
The team that we had seen that following war hadn't seen us in a while, so they probably, I'm gonna guess, this is an assumption, but they probably didn't have notes on our teams or
Hmm.
and they didn't, so they weren't suspecting anything when they saw our front line,
Hmm.
right? They just went in and attacked, and we said, oh, okay, cool. So we played our war in the middle. And we talked about this in the previous video. A lot of the war happens right here. Basically, there's a legendary tower position, and then there's a rare campfire position. And most of the war happens here. I'd say about 3/4, right? And so you're jockeying for position here. And so we do that. And we did the exact same thing Furia did to us. We overload their board. We continuously hold the line on their side so that they have to fight back in order to even get onto our side. They exhaust their resources, they exhaust their attacks. And then once they're done, we spent I think 2.5 hours total to create that diagonal. Their team's blocked. We've got our best teams at rare, epic, and legendary in position. And then we take gate and take treasury. And one of the questions I get from this particular position all the time is, well, if your best 10 legendary teams are in the 2 towers that you've occupied, then how do you keep the gate?
Hmm.
You don't keep the gate. And the reason why you don't have to keep the gate is because you take the gate, then there's a 30-minute cooldown, and then it's a race between you and your opponent who can retake the gate before you take the treasury.
Hmm.
And in most cases, when I'm employing this particular position, we have the capability of racing 12-8. We know that we're doing this. They don't know that we're doing this.
Hmm.
So they have to cobble up 8 different teams, usually by 8 different players if you want to be fast.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is if you've got 4 players that have 2 teams left, it's going to take twice as long as if 8 players are on and only need 1 team.
That's a really
So
important point, I think, for people that may be less experienced is if you can saturate every team in a position, That way, say the average length of a battle is 7.5 minutes or something like that. In 7.5 minutes, you've cleared it, assuming you have full success there. Whereas if you have, like you said, 8 positions to take, 4 people with 2 teams each, maybe it's going to take you 15 minutes or more. And that gives twice as much time for the opponent to do what they need to do. So that saturation of particular points is really important, but that does require coordination.
Exactly. But we're already coordinated. We already know that we need 12 teams or 12, sorry, one team for 12 people.
Mhm.
And we're just going to go in. And it's really fun to see, especially if you have no attacks left and you're just kind of like watching the war happen. It is the most fun to just see 0 teams on that treasury, and then boop, 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 boop. And you just see people fly in. And you can imagine it's kind of like a real war where all of a sudden it's just like guerrilla tactics. Like everybody pops up out from the bush at the same time, like, all right, let's go. And you just get to watch as we just like ravage this treasury. It's super fun to watch.
Mhm. So that's diagonal. I remember you mentioned that before. And it sounds like that's just as relevant as ever, if not even a better tactic now that the treasury does not need to be held, because you can do this at any point in the war. You don't have to try to do this later in the war or at a certain point. So, yeah. So, if unless there's anything else you wanted to mention about that tactic, I'm very curious what another possible different tactic is, because a lot of these are new to me, where I wasn't on the leadership side of the team, so I'm just kind of carrying out the attacks, not always knowing what the bigger picture was. So this is really exciting for me, just as someone who thinks strategically, to be like, oh, that's so interesting. So yeah, if there wasn't anything else you wanted to mention about that particular one, what else?
So definitely. I think that first one, I've kind of squeezed all the juice out of that guy. I will say though, I forgot to give this caveat earlier. I am giving these in order of what I would consider to be like the least time consuming, and I guess just like the least complicated, convoluted tactics, and I'm going to get up into the more complex tactics. And it's not complex as so far as like strategy goes. All of these are pretty, like, they're systematic. Once you do it one or two times, you understand most of the nuance, but some of them just take more coordination on the part of your guild wars, like your guild. And some of them are just, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to give you an order from like most feasible to implement early. And then once you get good at this first strategy, let's try the second strategy and the third and the fourth. So the second strategy. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That was nice of you to give the easy stuff first. So go hit that like button to appreciate Eddie giving you the easy stuff first and not making you work till the end of the video.
Yeah, right. There you go. So if you're trying, you're a guild leader, or you're just a friend, you're somebody who's in a guild, you love playing guild wars, and you want to take this to your leadership team, that's strategy number 1 that I think is the easiest to implement. That's one of those, you get a little coordination going with your team. You can try it once, twice, and then, after that, you start to perfect it. You start to understand the timing. You start to understand, oh, hey, they're fighting back, so maybe we need to take the second diagonal. Or, oh, hey, they're fighting back, so we're going to take one position over. And then once that cools down, we're going to go back up through and we're going to continue. Right. There are little tweaks that you have to do in game. If obviously, if the defenses start to arise, you have to pay attention and you have to respond. But that's for video 1 and 2. We're talking about big old tactics for winning. So let's get into the second one. The second one is double step 2x2. I've heard a whole bunch of different things to call it, but ultimately you just need to remember, for every single column of positions on a board, you are going to try and occupy 2 of them. And you want the 2 of them to be touching, to be adjacent. It doesn't have to be, but it makes it easier. And once I explain exactly what we're going to do, you'll understand. So the first thing you want to do is you want to identify from the top and the bottom of your opposing towers which team is the easiest to defeat.
Mhm.
So if I'm not even paying attention to the middle for a specific reason that I'll explain. But if I've got a top tower that has 5 res teams, all of them are pretty high total power. I
Mhm.
look at the bottom and I've got 3 res teams. All of them are pretty high total power, but there are 2 teams that seem a little bit weaker.
Mhm.
So I've made my value judgment on which tower I think is weakest between the top and the bottom. I'm going to take that one and the middle one, regardless of how strong the middle is,
Mhm.
because I want to make sure that my 2 positions in each column are adjacent to each other. And you'll understand again as I continue. So you take 2 of the positions from each of the columns and you continue to do this.
Mhm.
There are pros and cons to this particular strategy. The pro is that unlike the first strategy, the diagonal, where you're fighting in the middle consistently throughout the first 3 quarters of the battle, trying to deplete the resources and the attacks of the opposition, and then busting through at the very end.
Mhm.
Instead, here, what you're trying to do is you're trying to snake through their defenses the entire game.
Mhm.
So from the get-go, you take 2 towers, you look next at, let's say we took the bottom in the middle, right?
Mhm.
So I'm looking at 3 different rare campfires once we get done with the cooldown. I'm looking at the one that's above the middle, the one that's below the middle, and the one that's below the bottom. Those are the 3 I'm looking for. And specifically, I'm doing the same thing again. That's the cool part about this, is you don't have to remember a whole bunch of like directions or anything like that. You're doing the same thing every single time.
Mhm.
So let's say, for instance, this time the camp that's at the top right above the middle, and then the one adjacent to it, the middle one, we're always at the middle, remember, then we take those 2.
Mhm.
And you're going to notice that as you continue to do this throughout the columns of the opposition's positions, you always have, and I mean always have, backup in case they fight back.
Mhm.
This is the reason why this is the more solid, more kind of mid-rangey strategy.
Mhm.
This requires paying attention. This requires adapting, because you're doing it over the course of most of the war instead of just the last couple of hours.
Mhm.
But you get rewarded for that. And the way you get rewarded for that is with the diagonal. If for some reason you don't have teams that are just far and away better, or you underestimate how many attacks the opposition's actually made,
Mhm.
that diagonal gets shot with 1 position.
Mhm.
Here, they have to take 2 positions in one of the columns. And when they're doing that, remember, cooldown is 30 minutes long. And if that's the case, then I'm just taking another position in the column and continuing the snake.
Mhm. So
And so,
it's harder to take those positions because you're taking twice as many, but for that reason, it's harder for them to recover that back because again, it gives you options. They have to take one at a time, and as they do so, you can just take the other one to keep your path present.
correct, exactly. And so it does take more coordination, which is why I think it's more complex as a strategy than the first strategy, but it yields more positive results on a more consistent basis if you're implementing it correctly.
Mhm.
And it's cool because it means that regardless of time zone for your guild, anybody who is in your guild can actively participate in an offense that contributes to a treasury win.
Mhm.
If you're not there for the last couple hours in the first strategy, you just kind of fight in the middle like you did and just hope that everybody else on your team can get you the treasury. Here, everyone gets to participate.
So, based on the new treasury rules and being able to take it early and not have to retain it, um, is there any reason why you would ever hold back with either of with the second strategy mostly? If you just have a straight shot, are you just going to blaze through as fast as you possibly can, or can you think of any reason why you might want to play it more slowly? In the past, slow was important, but how about now?
Yes, there are certain reasons why you may want to take it slow. They're not as apparent as they were before, but there's still reasons. I think of a fight a war that we had against a specific guild, Iron Dragons, who I have a lot of respect for. They've done a really good job of continuously improving their processes in their war, and they're one of the best defensive war guilds that we fight against. They're incredibly good at keeping their stuff shut. And so I remember right a couple weeks after we started, after the changes, we started snaking, and then we got into against the Iron Dragons, and they were just shutting down. Every single time we would take two positions, they took two back before we could get to rare, right? Like, so we would take the legendaries, we're going to rare, and then we might even get those rare ones. But by the time we did, both of the legendary positions had been retaken, and they were just hammering us and hammering us. And that's because, unlike the first strategy, if you're taking double of the positions, you have to have double the A teams, and that's not necessarily something you have as a guild. And so you have one of two choices. You can either make a really good position and a weaker position, or you can kind of mix them. And in the case of Iron Dragons, you can't mix them. We found that out really quickly because they'll just retake both of them. And so we held back specifically for timing purposes. If you notice that when they're retaking your positions, 10 people are retaking your two positions, guess what? Everybody's awake, everybody's alert. Right now is not a time to go for the treasury, because you're just going to continuously use your attacks and they're ready to go. So you wait a couple of hours, you try again, and you notice, oh wow, only 4 teams are trying to recover lost positions. That's when you make the push. So you really have to be cognizant of what the defense is doing when they're cracking back at you, and how many players are actively participating in the return.
And that just makes sense. I mean, that sounds like it would be a standard warfare practice, just a good strategy overall, and it's sort of like the path of least resistance, except that doesn't imply a timing thing. But if you are attempting to do, it's like driving in traffic. If you want to get somewhere fast, or you want to drive somewhere, don't drive when the roads are full. You're going to have a hard time getting through. You want to go when there's no traffic. And it sounds like that's the same thing. Traffic here being them resisting your movement. You try to push through, and then nope, you're blocked. So yeah, that just kind of makes good intuitive sense.
Right. I think of it as like, strategy 1 is a bulldozer. I don't care how much resistance is happening. We're pushing through, and we're just, that's just what we're doing. We're just going to keep hitting. And if we get the treasury, great. And if they find a way to get through our defense, well, we tried, and we'll see if we can get it next time. Maybe we need to take our top 10 teams that are legendary and make them a little bit better, or try and buff up those teams. Here, we're talking about an F1 racer. Like we're making twists and turns along the way. And, I say F1 over something like NASCAR because we are hitting the brakes at certain points, right? Like there are certain places where we're hitting the brakes and we're meandering. And we might be taking different positions, or, in this case, sometimes we just have to full stop and wait a couple hours. And that's okay. Again, the cost associated with the strategy is coordination. That is only going to work if several of your players can wait 2 hours or 4 hours or however long it takes before the coast is clear.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one I remember us doing more frequently, or that at least, maybe I'm not sure if it was more frequent, but that's the one I recall seeing more often, is this double path through. And when you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. We have a very wide passage through to the treasury, which just means there's more room. Okay, any other thoughts about that before moving on to number 3 as we ratchet up complexity?
Yeah, not particularly. I just want to remind our listeners or viewers, it's very important to remember all of these require a modicum, at least, of coordination. This is, again, advanced strategy. And so the 2 that I'm about to get into are going to require not all hands on deck, because that's usually not feasible, but they require most of the guilds. So it's important that if you try one of these last two strategies that I have for you that are very similar, I'm only going to speak briefly about each of them because they're basically the same thing. You have to have a kind of an all hands on deck approach.
Okay, that's good. Good caveat.
Let's get started. Yeah, no, okay. So strategy number 3, I call it the goldfish, basically because that's what it looks like at the end of, like, if you do it correctly and there's just no opposition, it kind of looks like a goldfish that you've created. Like, and notice these are red and blue, right? So I know it sounds stupid and hokey, but like, yeah, so all of a sudden these colors start changing, and now and I call it the goldfish because you start round 1 with a very strong, very aggressive front that creates the tail of the goldfish. Okay, so you go into the 3 towers. We're no longer paying attention to which total power is smaller, or has fewer total power, or anything like that. We're just taking the entire front line. I don't want them touching my side. I want them having to get through one of these 3 legendary positions, one of these 3 tower positions, before they can even touch our battlefield. We are going full front, like just full front. Everybody's hitting as hard as they can. This is the kind of war tactic where you have 15 people attacking at once. At a minimum, right? We're just taking towers. So you take the entire front row. Then once that cools down, you take 2 in the middle, rares. And then the 1 rare in the middle. I apologize, because there are only, no, that's right, two, because there are 4, right? It expands out. There are 3 towers, then 4 campfires, then 4 camps, then 3 towers, gate treasure. So you take 2. And the fish starts to, it was a tail, and now it starts to get a little smaller. And then towards the end, you take like 3 of the epic, and then you take all of the tower, and it creates like a tail and then a little body that creates.
You're going goldfish. 3 and then 2 in the middle, and then 3. So I guess just leaving one of the top or bottom ones out in the epic row. All 3 towers again.
Yep. And then
that's a lot of coverage.
And then gate and treasury. We've done it. I would say towards the end, we would do it against teams that we were fairly confident that we could beat. And we would only employ this whenever we had a vast majority of our guild players on at the same time. It's tough to do, but it's extremely powerful. And the reason why it's extremely powerful is because it takes defenses by surprise, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. If you think about it, the 3 towers in and of themselves, that's obvious, right? If they retake those towers, we're cut off. Sure. But what happens is they always, and I say always, that's not necessarily the case, but most of the time when faced with this for the first time, defenses want to fight closest to their treasury and take out those teams. The reason they want to do that is because if they don't do that soon, if you say you take the front tower, the middle tower line, once we retake it, we just resume. Right. And so the epic area and then the legendary towers at the end, that tends to be where the real fight happens whenever you're, because we're basically backing them into a corner. That's exactly what we're doing. We're taking all 3 of the towers on that side too. And if they haven't done anything up until this point to stop one of the columns, now they've got 2 different legendary tower columns that they have to take in order to play against us on our side of the field, and they've got to take at least 1 to even be able to attack. And so what we do is we overwhelm as much as we can, and then we play on their side from that point on. You just keep, and so kind of like what Iron Dragons would do to us, when every time we would take, they would take it back. You set up a line at the head of the goldfish, and you just keep that line of legendary towers stocked with your your best legendaries, or 15 best legendaries are slotted in there.
Mhm.
And then you just keep retaking, because every time they take yours, they come back to your castle. You get to bring them back in whenever you retake. And so you just play defense for the rest of the time, and then eventually push into the treasury whenever you want, right? So with the old rules, you would do that at the very end of the game. Here, whenever they get tired.
Yeah. Whenever you're available and they're hopefully not available. So is this something you would only do against a team you perceive to be less of a formidable opponent? Like you wouldn't do this if you're against a really tough alliance, you probably wouldn't try this because a tougher alliance means that the teams you're up against are going to be more of a challenge for you, and to maintain that much coverage is probably going to be a significant undertaking, if not perhaps foolish if you're anticipating a really tough battle. So is this more of like we're anticipating an easier matchup, let's make it quick, or give me the pitch for this strategy over the others?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the thought process here is one, I mean, yeah, you've kind of hit the nail on the head with this. This is a team that you've probably beat consistently before with your strategies.
Mhm.
However, you can do this against a team that you find more challenging. It's just that the timing has to be there. Just like in the second strategy, you got to know when, oh, this isn't working, we need to scale back. Because unlike the second strategy, we're talking about a ton of attacks to get this done.
Mhm.
So if it doesn't work properly, we don't have, we might have a second chance at this, but we don't have the third and the fourth, like with the snake.
Yeah.
Eventually, we run out of attacks.
Mhm.
So yes, I definitely recommend, especially the first few times that you do this against a team that you know is probably not going to put up a big defense against you.
Mhm.
But also, and this is extremely important, I'm not taking this up against an opponent that has like regularly routed us. There's only a couple. From our alliance, I think there's maybe two teams that can beat us with consistency. Yeah, I'm not bringing this against them. I understand that their coordination level is unfortunately superior to our team, and so I'm not wasting attacks on this strategy.
Mhm. Okay, it's good to
Yeah.
know. Is there a fourth?
Yeah, well, there is.
It's similar.
It's not a strategy.
Sure.
It's a beating, and it's happened to us a couple of times. It's demoralizing, it's sad, but it works, and that is the blackout. And everybody who's played bingo before knows what the
Mhm.
blackout is before I even say it. There's
Yeah.
been a couple of times where if there is one team that just has our number. They're coordinated, their team is incredible. They rarely lose battles, much less wars.
Mhm.
And so what they'll do is they'll take 15 to the center line, they'll take 20 to the campfire,
Whoa.
20 to the camp, 15 to the tower, take the gate, and then just laugh, I'm sure, as they walk into our treasury. And then and then like what do you'll see little parts where we've tried to like come back,
Yeah.
and but it's a bloodbath. You do this, and it's the same thing as the third strategy for the most part. The only difference is that I would never take the fourth strategy to a team that has ever beaten me before.
Yeah. This
I
is
would take the third one every
where you
once in a
assert your
while.
dominance.
Yeah, you have to have so much swagger to even attempt it, but then you also have to have the strategy, the coordination, and the sheer just the heroes and the ability, and the experience to be able to back it up and to execute it. And the only thing that it differs in is that it's an all out just like push. So if the team that beats you fights back, you probably just can't do it again. It's a one shot.
Mhm.
Yeah. And in the third strategy, you leave yourself on the outer rim a little bit of like meandering. If you're really in a hurry to get to the treasury, if they start taking back in the middle, you can go to the outside, kind of like with the snake, where you can, there's a little bit of movement.
Hmm.
With this, you have shown your hand.
Yeah,
It's one of those. If you can beat this, great. If not, we have your treasury and probably the game.
and your dignity.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So one question, do you have any quick advice on, I mean, I think with the last two, it's a bit easier to decide, but in terms of the first two, do you have any quick advice on how to decide which of these you're going to do in advance? I think it's probably best to know going into the war what you want to attempt so that you're not wasting attacks and then having to pivot to something else. So would that just be based on the level of coordination you can expect based on the intensity of your guild or lack thereof? Or would there be considerations, other considerations outside of that that you would recommend people take?
Yeah. So for anybody who's played any other sort of strategy game or done a competitive sport, I think it goes without saying that to understand your team can make you a good team. To understand the other teams makes you a great team. There's a reason why coaches watch film of their opponents all the time. They take notes, they make adjustments, and they find ways to work around the strategy they've seen from their opponents in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So that along with the things that you just said, coordination, of course, your level of coordination is important. Understanding the teams that you have and what your best teams are, what your second best teams are for each rarity, and so on and so forth, and being able to make, prioritize teams is incredibly important. But then the next level is understanding where your opponent's at, how you fare against this opponent on a regular basis, so that you can get a feel for which strategy you think would be best employed against them.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example of this, I spoke about Iron Dragons earlier, right? That's the kind of team I'm probably not even taking the Goldfish into.
Mm-hmm.
What I've noticed is if we can snake properly, and we can wait until they've kind of either exhausted the resources or they have fewer teams to coordinate and just like immediately bounce back. That's what I'm doing against that team, because they're a highly defensive team.
Mm-hmm.
If we lose 2 or 3 wars straight and I go up against a team that I haven't seen in 3 months and just happen to get really high up for them and we've gotten really low for us,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm gonna blot out the sky with arrows. Like, let's go. So I think really it's important, one, to know what your guild is capable of doing, just against an empty board, right? What they're capable of doing coordination wise. How many teams can you get, or how many players can you get to be on the game at the same time? And then lastly, who your opponent is. If
Mm-hmm.
you know those 3 things, then you can choose a strategy that's right for you. And then you can use that, hopefully to success against your opponents. And
Yeah.
one last thing I do want to say about these strategies is that all of these strategies are initial setups to the game, right? It's kind of like in chess, the opening principles or opening moves are there, and your strategy exists for about 8 moves, but then from there you're playing against an opponent who also makes decisions and also thinks. So it's really important to realize that each of these strategies is a setup to get you in a really good place to win, but you still have to be thinking in real time about different things and augmenting these things, like making small tweaks
Yeah.
so that you can win the game.
That was something I wanted to add too, is that this is not just a button you press and then something happens. There's a lot of moving parts, a ton of moving parts, because you have trap usage, you have what quality teams you're putting in these positions for what you want to hold. As you mentioned before, if you're doing a row of 2, are you putting your best teams on one side and your worst teams on the other? Are you splitting them evenly? It's going to depend who you're up against, where are you putting traps. So keep in mind that if you try something like this and it doesn't work the first time, you can evaluate whether the opponent you tried it against was too difficult, or there's a lot of things to think about and to tweak, as you mentioned. So if you don't have immediate success, don't write off the strategy completely, unless you're trying to do the blackout against the strongest team you've ever played. That's probably not going to work. So for the first two, seeming like maybe the most feasible across the widest array of battles, try different things. Hopefully you've got some people in your guild that are interested in thinking about those things. Maybe you create a subcategory of people that are interested in thinking about war strategy, and they're going to be the ones calling the shots. This is a pretty common arrangement to see, but just keep in mind, tweaks will be necessary. At what point you do this, depending on what guild you're up against. Again, all of these factors are there, and this is something that is kind of a technique to master and not something to just employ and expect it to work immediately. So I just want to put that out there as a caveat, so people don't go, well, I tried it and it didn't work, and what else do you got? Like this is the secret sauce. This is the stuff. Now you just have to figure out how to make it fit in the application that you're using it in.
Yeah, that's it. Coaches can tell you all day, they can draw up the strategy, but players are the ones that score the goals, right? And in this case, that's how it works. Things change, and you've got to be able to change with them, and that's what spells victory for you and your team.
Yeah.
Your guild.
All right, well, maybe we can sign off here. I feel like this has been a bunch of good information. Definitely something I would personally recommend coming back to, at least in part, to there was a lot of information dropped here, and it would be difficult to be able to capitalize on all of this right away. So just keep in mind, this is something that you work towards. You keep trying to improve. Just keep trying to do better. Don't try to be the best right away. Don't think this is going to revolutionize your group, but these are the tools necessary to take you to a higher level. And these are tools still used at the highest level. So if you have all the pieces there, this will help you improve. So hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you have additional questions that you feel like were not answered, feel free to put those in the comments down below, and either they can be answered down there, or maybe that could be the possibility for another video. I do want to have that support out there for people who are looking for it. And I'm just so excited to be able to bring this information. Some of this was new to me as well, from this level of detail, which means, I'm someone that thinks about strategy a lot. So that means that I think this is not even on a lot of people's radars at all. So I'm really excited for how the potential of this to really change the Guild Wars space, and make it more, bring out more dedicated teams, people having more fun with it, and just give you some things to work on. So thank you so much for all of the wisdom you've imparted here. It's obvious this has come from months of coordinating and thinking about these things and making these game time decisions and making tweaks. So yeah, very, very appreciative that you were willing to share all this information with people. And if you guys are appreciative as well, hit that like button, or just say thanks, Eddie, in a comment. Share your support that way as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Any final thoughts for the people?
Yeah, last thing, Mr. Spock said, comment, on all these things. If you have a strategy that works for you, just like we had strategies that work for us, pass those on in the comments too. Let people figure things out, and explore new things. And thank you so much, Mr. Spock, for having me on. It's always a pleasure, and I'll do it as long as you're happy.
Oh, all right. Well, be careful what you wish for. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe. Really appreciate the support. Trying to get to 10K. We're close. Share your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.